Hey folks, this is Kalani. We finally have some more information about the new player housing system coming in the next World of Warcraft expansion Midnight. Everyone will be able to have a house, we'll be working together with a neighborhood of up to 50 players, and we can even specifically set up entire neighborhoods just with guildies and friends. It's shaping up to be a really cool new evergreen feature, so we'll go over all of the news we have relating to that. There are also some important notes about the future of WoW to discuss. Patch 11.1.5 has just started its testing cycle, so the content flow isn't stopping anytime soon, and then we also have some more updates for patch 11.1. There's a lot to talk about, so let's break it all down in this week's WoW news video. Now before we jump in, be sure to hit up that like button and subscribe so you never miss another video. Let's kick things off with the blue post that talks about the future of World of Warcraft and where we're heading next. Perhaps the most exciting new info we got this week was all about player housing and how the dev team are going about creating this all-important feature. To start with, we won't see any major requirements for purchasing or obtaining your house. Some games or MMOs have upkeep or rent payments, some MMOs require you to fork over a significant amount of currency, and some are even tied to microtransactions. WoW housing won't have any of that. No requirements, high purchase costs, lotteries, upkeep, or loss of your house if you decide to take a break from the game. If you want a house, you can have a house. You won't lose it if you run out of gold or game time, so that's probably one of the most important factors squared away already. Everyone will get to have a house. Houses are going to be organised into about 50 plot neighbourhoods, so you'll have just shy of 50 neighbours to share your housing experience with. These neighbours seem to be fixed and persistent as well, so you could have the same neighbours for years to come, providing neither of you decide to move your plot. That's kinda cool, and it brings back some sense of permanence from servers back in the day before things like sharding. You'll be able to choose public or private neighborhoods. Public seem to be open to pretty much anyone, so that's like a server-wide neighborhood kind of deal, but you'll also be able to make private neighborhoods as well, which can be created by groups of friends, communities, or guilds. So you can have a neighborhood that's just full of your guildies, and you can visit each other's houses and have a grand old time. What's curious to me is that the blue post says neighborhoods let players live next to each other, work together, and share in the rewards of being part of the neighborhood. In the private neighborhood description, they also say that you can inhabit, progress, and customize your neighborhoods together. So these may not just be collections of houses, they sound like an extension of the housing system itself, with progression-related milestones and rewards. Being able to work together as a guild and level up your neighborhood, whatever that's going to look like, sounds like a lot of fun. Now you may be wondering where these neighbourhoods are going to be. We'll have one zone set up for the Alliance and one for the Horde. The Alliance neighbourhoods will take inspiration from Elwyn Forest, Westfall, and Duskwood, so pretty much the entirety of the human starting zones and experience. Over on the Horde side, you'll have Durotar, Ajara, and the coastline to work with, so very different backdrops and themes for each faction. What's really cool about this is that your houses will still be warband wide. Any character on your warband can visit your house no matter which faction they are a part of. So while you can't buy a Horde house on an Alliance character, you can buy a Horde house on a Horde character and then just play your Alliance character in the Horde house. So if you end up liking one aesthetic over another, it doesn't actually matter where the majority of your characters are, as long as you have at least one character on each faction. You should be able to live out your housing fantasy as you see fit. So if you're thinking the Alliance housing is probably going to look much cooler, you don't have to faction change anything, you just need one Alliance character to buy the house initially. It's also important to note that the entire system is being designed with warbands in mind, as you would hope and expect. So everything you earn for your house should be available across all of your characters, and any character should earn progress and rewards for your entire warband, which is great because apparently we're going to have hundreds and hundreds of decorations and house customizations to unlock and collect, and the vast majority will come from in-game progress, not the cash store. So it's going to be like transmog all over again. I can imagine all sorts of decorations tied to old dungeons, raids, quests, storylines. It's going to be a farming bonanza. So your house will be shared across your entire warband. Now, there are three main pillars the dev team are using to build this feature up. Boundless self-expression, so we should be able to build whatever we want down to the nitty-gritty details. The way they talk about 3D experience and tools makes me think we may get very fine-tuned control over placement, so instead of having generic plots and points to build stuff like we did for garrisons, we may be able to place things pretty much however we want, which would make for a much more customizable experience. Housing is also supposed to be deeply social, so they will build the system to encourage interacting, playing and progressing with friends, neighbours, guilds and the wider community, so building up your neighbourhood is going to be really interesting. And then this will also be a long-lasting journey. Housing is going to be a core pillar of the game, with new content and systems added in regularly. So instead of this being a one-and-done feature, we should expect something new for housing with pretty much every major patch at the very least. I expect we'll always have new decor items to collect with any new kind of content that comes our way, and that will be used to fuel things like reputation and renown gameplay especially. This preview gives me a lot of hope for this feature. It sounds like they've taken a look at what works in other games, selected the best parts and adapted it for the current retail experience. We also won't have to wait all that long before we see more of this system in action. We'll get a full expansion reveal for Midnight later on this year, and housing will most likely be a part of the pre-expansion patch which could also arrive this year. So we may be sorting out our neighbourhoods, gathering our friends and guildies together to make a plan, and farming all of those decor items before 2025 comes to a close. So, player housing should be a huge part of the game moving forward, but the Blue Post went over some more interesting tidbits as well. The dev team want to focus more on the new player experience and getting returning players back up to speed in the best way possible. They talked about Exile's reach and how that could be improved. They want to streamline the experience and expand upon what it could look like in the future. They mentioned we should see updates on this front in Midnight and The Last Titan, and it's something they're definitely committed to improving. The new or returning player experience can be quite jarring, especially with how much changes with each new expansion that comes our way. Figuring out a way to get folks caught up or introducing them to the game for the first time will be paramount for maintaining a healthy player base. I think one of the reasons why Classic WoW is so popular with first-time players is because it's just a lot simpler when compared to retail. There are fewer moving parts, so it's easier to get a grasp of how the game works and what different kinds of content expect from you. A good chunk of this discussion comes down to approachability as well. When you look at the endgame pillars of retail WoW, it can be quite daunting to take those first steps into raids or Mythic Plus dungeons. Delves definitely make things easier with it being solo player friendly, but you still have a lot to keep track of. Part of me wonders if the sweeping changes to difficulty in Season 2 are trying to address this concern of approachability as well. In Season 2, Delves are going to be easier in general, and Mythic Plus dungeons should be easier to jump into and progress through as well. They're making those systems and features less complicated and just easier to complete overall, which should make them more approachable for newer or returning players, so I'm very interested to see how this season plays out. The Blue Post also talks about user interface changes and how things are displayed on screen. They're always looking to improve readability, and we should see some more changes soon. I think a great example of this coming in patch 11.1 are the new spell or ability telegraphs and visuals. When the patch goes live, you're going to see that a lot of newer spells and graphics have this hard line to clearly mark the edges of puddles or AoEs. So instead of swirly effects with an ambiguous border, these newer effects are much clearer, and hopefully you'll see less instances of thinking you were out of an AoE and still getting hit by it. Personally, I think every ability in the game should have a clear telegraph like this. You shouldn't need to guess whether your character is standing in an ability or not, and I would take functionality over visuals in this aspect of the game 10 times out of 10, so it would be fun to see what other UI updates and improvements the dev team have planned for the future. And then the last major point from the Blue Post was that the dev team really want to double down on community. In fact, they have a dedicated social initiative within the team, which kind of sounds like they have a mini team that's going to focus on social stuff specifically. They gave a few examples, like rewards for positive behavior, easier ways to connect with like-minded players, how in-game friends work, and we may see changes to the group finder and integration with external platforms and websites. That last part is kind of interesting. Imagine if you could open up a Wowhead page in-game somehow and just have a little add-on or app that lets you search for whatever you wanted on Wowhead without having to tab out. That could be pretty cool, but I wonder how far those kinds of integrations could go. Add-ons are already very powerful, so much so that some aspects of them have been limited over the last few expansions, but I guess we'll just have to wait and see what they have in mind. Apparently there are several social projects that we should hear about over the next year, so maybe some of those will work their way into the game as part of major patches later on down the road. World of Warcraft has definitely evolved quite significantly over the past few expansions, and this blue post promises even more changes as we look forward to Midnight and the Last Titan. Remember that we'll get a Midnight expansion reveal later on this year, and it should actually launch quite early next year. Housing should appear sometimes towards the end of 2025, and we have so many patches to look forward in between, so we're going to have back-to-back new content and updates for the next few years at least. Now moving on, there were also some adjustments to delves this week which should be pretty impactful for all the solo content players out there. To start with, tiers 9, 10 and 11 will be easier in Season 2 when compared to Season 1. Apparently, tier 11 was balanced and tuned by taking the highest item levels available from the entire game into account, so they were looking at fully upgraded Mythic Raid gear and saying, tier 11 should still be something of a challenge for these folks, so if you've been struggling with tier 11 delves in Season 1 and you don't Mythic Raid or do high-end Mythic Plus dungeons, you're probably just quite a bit below the gear level those tiers were actually balanced around. That's not ideal, and obviously the dev team agrees, so in Season 2 the higher tiers of delves will only take into account the item level of gear that you can obtain from delves, so it cuts out all of the noise from the other end game options in their gearing process. So tier 9, 10 and 11 delves should be quite a bit easier because the gear rewards just from delves are a bit lower. That should make progressing from tier 8 up to tier 9 and beyond much smoother and easier if you only focus on delves as your preferred endgame content. In addition to making higher tier delves easier, the new Gilded Crest rewards were also increased. When you run a bountiful tier 11 delve in Season 2, there will be a new Gilded cache at the end of your run that contains some Gilded Crests. Each cache used to contain 6 Gilded Crests, and you can only loot those caches 3 times per week, so we were looking at a weekly limit of 18 Gilded Crests, but that number was buffed up to 7 per cache this week for a weekly total of 21 Gilded Crests, so not a huge buff, but it's still better than it used to be. The rewards from Delver's Bounty Map treasure chests were also increased for higher tiers of delves, so you can now get 10 Gilded Crests if you use a map on a tier 11 delve. Adding those to the 21 from the Gilded caches means you'll be able to get 31 Gilded Crests per week from the delve system now, up from about 20. That's a pretty significant boost, and will make upgrading your gear in Season 2 quite a bit faster if you only play delves. Delves are shaping up to be much better in Season 2, so if you want more information about how delves are changing as we head into the next season, you can find a link in the comments to a video that goes over everything in detail. It's not just changes for delves though, the new Raid Renown track has seen some significant updates this week. In the latest PTR build, a few of the Renown rewards have been shifted around, replaced, or just entirely removed. The big ones are the removal of the 2 dinar-like currencies towards the end of the Renown track, and the addition of 2 new mounts. The puzzling cartel chips would have been traded into vendors for specific raid loot, allowing you to get special items or best in slot gear without having to rely on RNG drops. We've seen this thing quite a few times now, in extra seasons towards the end of previous expansions, as well as during the anniversary event for the Blackrock Depths raid. Being able to directly buy the gear you want from a vendor, even if it's just 2 items for the entire season, at least gives you something to work towards, and you know you will eventually get what you need. These cartel chips did have one major complaint: they were right at the end of this Renown track. They were going to come in at Renown level 17 and 19, and the current plan is you would only be able to get 1 Renown level per week from the raid. That means you wouldn't be able to use the first one until at least 16 weeks into the season, so basically right at the very end. That's definitely not ideal, but removing the currency entirely is obviously worse. Late diners are better than no diners. It's good news then that the dev team made a blue post talking about these changes and explained that the puzzling cartel chips have in fact been removed from the raid renown track, and that change is intended, but the currency itself should still be a part of patch 11.1 and available from some other source. They're just taking it out of the raid renown track. We don't have any more details except that we should find out more about this change sometime soon, so we'll still be able to buy our most coveted gear directly from vendors in patch 11.1, which is great to hear. The two main questions that I would have, which will hopefully be answered soon, would be how many of these chips we'll be able to get our hands on now, and how long will we have to wait until they become available. The renown track limited us to just 2, but if the new method is more repeatable, we could potentially get more access to the puzzling cartel chips with these changes in place, and if they become available earlier than week 16, then it could be faster than the renown track as well. So hopefully the new source is equal or better when compared to the renown track, and I'll be interested to see if it's going to be limited to just raid content specifically, or if non-raiders will have a chance to get their hands on the currency as well. As for the two new mounts, you'll be able to pick up the Thunderdrum Misfire mount at renown level 8 and the Dark Fuse Chompactor at renown level 17, so there will be 2 new mounts for you to collect for earning this new reputation by taking part in raid content in Season 2. And then the other major update was to the raid skip. This was previously available at renown level 8, which would have been on week 7 of the raid, placing it 3 weeks later for any guild that reliably cleared the raid early on in the tier. It also didn't seem to have any other restrictions, which could have let you skip heroic or mythic bosses that you hadn't already killed. So they knocked it down to renown level 5, meaning you'll unlock it on week 4 as long as you're keeping up with your renown farming, and then to use the skip you'll also need to kill the second to last boss on the difficulty that you're trying to use the skip on, so you can't skip on mythic unless you've done the proper work and cleared up to the last boss. That's all good news in my opinion, and is just fairer in general. I also want to point out that patch 11.1 is now marked as a release candidate build on the PTR, which basically means what you see on the PTR is going to be what we get. No more major changes should happen between now and its release date, and the release should be quite soon. I would expect an announcement for that within the next 2 weeks at the very latest. We will probably see class changes and balance tuning done in hotfixes from this point on, but the major systems and features are more or less locked in. With patch 11.1 right on our doorstep, it should also come as no surprise that the dev team are moving on to patch 11.1.5. The WoW dev server was just updated to 11.1.5, and this is basically their internal server, so we don't have any information or data mining just yet, but it does tell us that the WoW team are now testing this patch internally. If they stick to their Dragonflight PTR schedule, we will likely see the PTR for 11.1.5 go up a couple of weeks after patch 11.1 hits live servers. They really kept the ball rolling with PTRs and testing throughout Dragonflight, and with the War Within having a shorter lifespan, I would actually expect that same pace to continue, if not get faster. If we look back to the 2025 roadmap, we can see that the major updates or features planned for 11.1.5 include some new content called Nightfall, so I imagine Xalatath and the Void will re-enter the story center stage and we'll have some new story content and open world content to enjoy, and then we also have Horrific Visions being revisited, which is very interesting. Horrific Visions were solo scenarios from the end of BFA that were quite challenging, and they had various optional difficulty spikes that could increase your rewards. They were kind of an early timed scenario feature. With them being related to the old gods, I could see how they could bring them back and change things up to reflect Xalatath messing with our heads this time instead of N'Zoth, or maybe N'Zoth is making a comeback too. Those two pesky void creatures did make some kind of deal before N'Zoth bit the dust, but either way we should have some new scenario style content to look forward to in the new patch as well. I'm excited to see what updates they have in store for us. But that's all of the WoW news we have for this week, so that's it for this video. What do you think about the housing system from what we've seen so far? Do you think the Alliance neighbourhoods or the Horde neighbourhoods will look cooler? And do you have any ideas for who you would make a private neighbourhood with? Leave all your thoughts in the comment section below. A big thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon and to all of our members here on YouTube. You can see the names floating by on screen. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can find links in the description or click the join button just below the video. If you enjoyed the video or found it useful in any way, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you're always kept up to date. Thanks for watching folks, good luck and have fun, and as always I will see you next time.